We are on Daf Lamed Vav Amid Beis. We just, so far, all we learned was the Mishnayos. We learned one big Mishnah on this parak. We learned about the dinim of Shavuos HaPikadon, a shvua of someone who owes money. He owes something, an object or money or an aveda, whatever it is, and he makes a shvua to say that he didn't, that he doesn't owe it, and then later he's maida. He has to pay back the Karen, and he has to pay the Chaimish, and he has to bring the Karban Asham. We talk about over here is the Karban Asham. And one of the things we said, the Chayiv al Zodan Hashkov Ashgosim Zayin Avagav, and the Chayiv al Shigos Great Asim. Uma Chayiv al Zodan Asham Bekasav Shkolam. So the din of Shavuos HaPikadon applies even if he's a Zodan, even if he's a Mazid. Zak the Gemara. Ravacha bar Huna, Shmuel Bred Rabba bar Chana, Yitzchak Bred Yehuda, Tanu Shavuos Bei Rabba Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana came across this chevra that were all learning Shavuos Bei Rabba. Amlahu, Hazed b'Shavuos HaPikadon v'Hisra B'Ima. What happens if someone mentions someone who's amazed? What if the person, he wasn't just amazed that he purposefully wasn't, that he didn't owe something and then later admitted it, but there were Edim that gave him Asra and said, if you do this, you'll be Chayiv on a lav. So there's three possibilities. What would be the conclusion in such a case? Given the Chidushu, the Chala Torah le'ashcha mezid a maisi carbon, since, as a general rule, the halacha is that you don't bring a carbon when you do something amazing. Usually, a carbon is for someone who does something b'shegi. And we said in the Mishnah clearly that Shavuos ha'edus is going to be brought. You're going to bring the carbon asham for amazing. So this is an unusual din, the din of Shavuos ha'pikadon. Loishna asrubei, loishna ba'asrubei. We'll say it's also going to be different, that there's not going to be a malchus. Even if you gave Hasra, you're not going to get malchus for it. The Torah was machadish asham for this lav, and this asham is applicable even by mezid. So that's the only consequence of doing it by mezid. Normally, when you do something by mezid, you're even allowed by mezid. If there's Hasra, you get malchus. But this is an unusual lav that you bring an asham. So the asham replaces the malchus. That's one possibility. Choice A. Oidilma, hanimil hechad le'asrubei. That's only where he didn't get a vasra. Aval hechad asrubei, milka lucky carbon le'maisi. What do you say? No. The Torah said that b'mezid you bring a carbon asham, but that's only if there's not the standard that the person, if he got asra, then he gets malchus, as we're going to see in the Gemara. Malchus is more chamer. People would much rather bring a carbon than get malchus. So when there's an opportunity to get malchus, when he fits the qualification to get malchus, he gets malchus, and then he's potter, and then in that case he's potter from the carbon. He doesn't bring the carbon asham. That's the second possibility. The third possibility is this guy gets both. Someone who was over on a Shavuos HaPikadon, b'mezid, and there's Edim. Because he did it b'mezid, he's going to bring a carbon asham, and because there was hasra, he's also going to get malchus. He's going to get two things. So again, the first choice is that the Torah said asham, and therefore there's no malchus at all, even with hasra. The second pshat is that the malchus, if there's hasra, takes the place of the asham, and the third pshat is they get both. You get malchus and you bring the carbon asham. So that was the question, the inquiry that they asked. Rav Kahana asked the people who are learning Shavuos. Amrulei, so they answered back to Rav Kahana, Tnina. We learned a Mishnah that can answer this. Chamura hemen Shavuos HaPikadon. Shavuos HaPikadon is more chamur than Shavuos ha'edus. Shechayven als deine makas was shegasa asham b'kesef shkalim. That this is a brisa that says that Shavuos HaPikadon is more common than Shavuos HaEdus, because Shavuos HaPikadon, you chayiv malchus if you do it b'mezid, and if you do it b'shoigig, you bring an asham. For the fact that we're saying that if he does it b'mezid, he gets malchus, vice does, he got hasra. But Amar malchus in carbon light, right? We said that the Brisa said that if he does it b'mezid, he gets malchus, and if he does it b'shoigig, he brings a carbon. It's vice does that. You see from that if he does it b'mezid, we're talking about where he's getting malchus, so it must be that it's asra, and we're saying he only gets malchus, he doesn't bring a carbon. Umay chumra. So what is the chumra taka? What is the Brisa saying that he brings that carbon the shuas pikadon is more common than shuas edus because it gets malchus b'mezid. Also, the nichal eidlenish the maisi carbon loyalki, because a person would rather be like in shuas edus, where if he does it b'shaygig, where he does it b'mezid, he still brings a carbon. Masha'en came by shuas pikadon that he gets malchus. But in any case, you see which choice was it? It seems like the second choice of the three choices we had, that where he gets malchus, where he has with his Eidim and they give him Asra, he only gets malchus and he doesn't bring a carbon. By Shuas HaPikadon. Amalur Rava Barisi, no. Man Tana Zadin Shuas HaPikadon Loinitin Lekapara Reb Shimon. Says this is like Reb Shimon that we had brought before. There'd been a little bit confusion when we had this Gemara before. We had brought that Reb Shimon holds that Bechlal by Shuas HaPikadon, there's no by Shuas HaPikadon there's no you don't bring a carbon asham. Reb Shimon has a different sheet of Bechlal from our Mishnah. He holds that b'mezid you don't bring a carbon. As it's not even a question of whether if he got asra, does it get switched to malchus? He holds b'chlal shuas HaPikadon does not get a kapara if he does it b'mezid. Aval Rabbanan, but maybe according to Rabbanan, our inquiry is about our Mishnah, which disagrees with that and says that you do bring a carbon asham b'mezid. Maybe carbon maisi. Maybe when someone does it is over b'mezid, not only does he bring a carbon, he also will not only will he get malchus, he will also bring a carbon. So that's one teretz to say that brisa is Reb Shimon, and that has nothing to do with our Mishnah, because our Mishnah clearly holds that someone who is over on Shavuos HaPikadon b'mezid will bring a carbon. Amalu Rav Kahana bar mina dahi. Rav Kahana said back to them, I could tell you even without that. You're asking the Shaila, what happens if someone makes a Shavuos HaPikadon b'mezid and there are Eidim that say that he was over on the Shavuos HaPikadon. And you brought this brisa that seems to say that he's only going to get malchus and not a carbon. I could slug up the brisa without saying that it's Reb Shimon. I have a different version of that brisa. You had a version where it said that if he's over on Shavuos HaPikadon b'mezid, he's going to get malchus. This is my version. Echad zdaina. It still starts the same way. Chamura hemenu Shavuos HaPikadon. Shavuos HaPikadon is more common than Shavuos HaEdus. It says echad zdaina ve'echad shigasa asham b'kesef shkalim. That by Shavuos HaPikadon, whether it's b'mezid or whether it's b'shaygig, you bring an asham, which is a kesef shkalim. So that's the case. Why is it more chomer than a Shavuos HaEdus? A Shavuos HaEdus also brings a carbon out of a yared. He also brings a carbon when he does it b'shaygig or b'mezid, right? We said before Shavuos HaEdus is also chayev b'mezid. So why is it more chomer? This one, the Shavuos HaEdus brings the carbon out of a yared, and the Shavuos HaPikadon brings the asham b'kesef shkalim. So Acham Asham B'Kesef Shkalim. because the asham is a more expensive carbon. It's cost 2 skalim. Masha enkein carbon oil b'yarid. By definition, what oil b'yarid is that it goes up and down. You could bring in either a more expensive one, you could bring a less expensive one. So that's the chumrah of the Shavuos hapikadon, that you bring a more expensive carbon. Back to Gemara, the ligmar mina. Let's let's bring a raya that you bring a carbon and you don't get malchus from this case. Let's learn out from this. So Gemara, no, even though it's so this Bryce Alamaisa is saying echad's daina ve'echad shegasa asham. You bring a, he says you only bring a carbon. You don't get malchus. So why don't we learn from there? Even according to the way you're saying the Bryce, we're saying you only bring a carbon. You don't get malchus. Like the Dilma de Hasrbe, maybe you're talking, maybe no, maybe the Bryce talking about, well, there's no Hasra, and that's the reason why there's no malchus. Okay, so again, let's review what we said so far, right? The original question was, when we're talking about a Shavuos Apikad, the Mishnah says a Shavuos Apikad Yechayiv, b'shaygig and b'mezid, you bring a carbon asham. The Gemara inquires, what happens if the person, before he made his Shavuos Eidus, before he lied about it, he was warned, if you make the Shavuah, you're going to be chayiv on a lav. That gets, and a lav brings malchus. So we had 3 options, right? One option is, do we say in that case that he gets malchus instead of the carbon? Right? We're saying Shavuos Eidus, Shavuos Apikadon, it's unusual that you bring a carbon even if you do it b'mezid. But maybe that only extends when there's no Eidim that give Hasra. But if you have Eidim Hasra, then the regular dinim kick in. Someone does something b'mezid, they get malchus instead of a carbon. Or do we say no? The Torah made a new din here of a carbon, so you only get a carbon. It doesn't make a difference if you got Hasra. It doesn't make a difference if you are over the lav, and with Hasra, it's still the Torah said that there's a din b'mezid, you bring a carbon, and that holds true even if there's Hasra. A third possibility is you get both. Someone who is over on Shavuos Apikadon, and there's Hasra, in addition to the din that b'mezid he brings the carbon, he also gets malchus. So we're trying to bring rayas to this question. Lishna Achrina, another, some people take out this Lishna Achrina because it's really just another raya on this question. Toshma. Ein chayav al shgasin. You're not chayiv on their shgaga. It's the base. Let me just check that. So I do. Take this Lishna Achrina last again. Ein chayav al shgasin. They're not chayiv on a shgaga. Mayin chayavin als doina asham, the kesef shkalim. We said in the Mishnah, our Mishnah, you're not chayiv for a shaygig. And what are you chayiv on a zaden? An asham. So the Gemara b'kesef shkalim. My law b'da asham. It's saying, the Gemara assumes for some reason that when it said you chayiv and you do it b'mezid and asham, sounds like we're deciding and there's no, the Mishnah could also be talking about what there's no Hasra. If Kahana does not come up, we're not talking about this whole question of whether you also get Malchus or you get Malchus instead of the Asham. That's only where there was Asra. If there's no Asra, then it doesn't come up. And our Mishnah could have been talking about a case where there's no Asra. Toshma. Loyam Amarta. So this is a very interesting Rashi. Before we even see this Gemara, let's see what Rashi says. Loyam Amarta, like around a quarter of the way from the bottom. Loyam Amarta, Loyadin b'may koi Loyam Amarta. Rashi says, I don't know the context of this brisa. Bring a brisa, Loyam Amarta. The Gemara always does that. It brings a brisa. It's not true. This is not as chomer as that. And usually there's a reason for it. Rashi says he doesn't know what was being discussed beforehand. Tashma. Loyam Amarta ben Nazir Tamir. Tamir Shechein Loika. We're saying that we're trying to say that a Tameh, a Nazir, then a Nazir is not allowed to become Tameh. If a Nazir became Tameh, The din is that he gets a malchus. So a nazir is more chamer. The Gemara, for some reason, the Bryce is saying that a nazir is more chamer than Shavuos HaPikadon. That a nazir, if he becomes tamei, he gets malchus. Time of Shavuos HaPikadon, she'ein loika. A Shavuos HaPikadon doesn't get malchus. From the fact that we said that the nazir gets malchus, mechalal da asra, it must be talking about a case where you got asra, who come at time b'shuas v'kan she'ein loika, avakaber maisi. We see that, but we're saying that shuas hapikadon, it's the chayr talking about where he got asra, and we're saying he doesn't get malchus, but he does bring a carbon. So that seems to be disposing of our original question of what happens when the Shuas HaBikadon has Asra, that does he just get Malchus, does he just bring a carbon, or to get both? We seem to be saying he just brings a carbon. So come on, no. My Ein Eloika, the Ein Nifte be Malchus. When it says he doesn't get Malchus, it means it's just that he doesn't, Malchus is not enough. Meaning that he could get, in addition to a Nazir, we're saying, so now it's coming the other way around. We're saying that Shuas HaBikadon is more Chomer than Nazir. That it's not, he's not potter with just Malchus. He gets Malchus. Could be it means he gets Malchus as well as bringing the carbon.
Just like the third Shita, right?
I'm sorry.
Just like the third Shita.
Right. Exactly. So it's possible. It could be understood either one of those two ways. It could be saying just Malchus. It doesn't get Malchus at all. It just gets carbon, or it can mean he gets both. So the Gemara Mechlal, in fact, the Gemara Mechlal the Nazir Tomei Nifte be Malchus. That's you trying to contrast Nazir Tomei to Shavuos HaPikadon to say that Shavuos HaPikadon is not Nifte be Malchus. It gets Malchus and it brings a carbon, as opposed to Nazir Tomei that only gets Malchus. A carbon survey, but there is a carbon for Nazir Tomei in addition to his Malchus. So that's not a contrast. They're both the same in that regard. Somewhere no, the carbon of the Nazir Tameh that he brings is not because of his tumah. Hasam the Maisi carbon kehechi the techel Naziris b'tahira. When a Nazir becomes Tameh, he has to then bring a carbon. The carbon, he gets Malchus from becoming Tameh, and then he has to bring a carbon. The purpose of the carbon is not a kapara for becoming Tameh, but it's a prelude to his restarting his Naziris. His first Naziris becomes Batal, and now he's starting a new Naziris. So this carbon is part of the next Naziris. It's not part of the kapara for becoming Tam. So that in the Chanami would be a contrast between Shavuos HaPikadon, if it were to have, Shavuos HaPikadon has both carbon and Malchus, because those are both for the Shavuos Sheker, Shavuos Sheker. Amrua Rabbanan Kamei de Rabba. Okay, so that is really the conclusion of this discussion. Where till now we've been discussing what is the answer of this open-ended question: what happens when there's Asra? Now, Rabba is going to discuss a specific point about Shavuos HaPikadon. Amrua Rabbanan Kamei de Rabba. They asked this question to Rabba. Amlu mechlal dechilei asrubei veika edim mechayev. He says it sounds like from this that the reason with it that you're clearing what happens if there's edim and they give hasra is he also going to get malchus. He said Rabba says I would look at it almost the other way around. I would think Rabba saying maybe that when someone has Edim, if someone's over on a Shavuos Edis and there's Edim that are contradicting what he's saying, maybe that's not a Shavuos Edis b'chlal. He shouldn't be mechoyev Shavuos Edis. He shouldn't even have to bring the carbon. The Edim make things better for this person who's making the Shavuos Edis. Right? What is the Shavuos Edis? Shavuos HaPikadon. I keep saying Shavuos Edis. What is the Shavuos HaPikadon? Reuben goes to Shimon and says, Shimon, you owe me money. And Shimon says, I swear I don't owe any money. So the Torah says, if he does this b'mezid, he has to bring a carbon ashur. Rab is saying, if there are edim that prove that Shimon owes the money, then Shimon's shvuah is not really relevant. Even if he makes a shvuah, the edim are going to make him swear, are going to make him pay in any case. And as we know, Shavuos HaPikadon is only when there's actual money at risk, where the shvuah is about money that he's trying to deny, that his denial causes a potential loss to Ruvain. But if there's Edom anyway, so his denial, his Shavuos, that's saying he doesn't owe the money, is meaningless. The Edom override his Shavuos. So Zakh Rabba, Amr lahu mechlal b'chili asur be'evik Edom mechayiv. His Shavuos saying that he doesn't owe the money is just talk. It's irrelevant talk. Yeah, there's any way Edom that are going to make him pay. So he shouldn't have to bring a carbon for this Shavuos Apikadon. It's not really a Shavuos Apikadon. It's a Shavuos, it's maybe a Shavuos Bitui. It's a Shavuos about something. He's lying about something, but it's not a Shavuos Apikadon. Seems that Rabba holds that someone who makes a Shavuos Apikadon, he denies money and there's Edom, he's going to be potter from bringing the carbon ashram. It's not going to be a Shavuos Apikadon. I'll bring you a price that agrees with you. The Torah says, the Gabi Shavuos Apikadon, the Kicheshba, what's the pasuk? If someone is, Bekichash means he denies, he contradicts. Someone says he owes him money and he denies it, then he's going to have to bring the carbon asham. Prat lamoida le'echad min ha'achan or le'echad min ha'shut. That comes to the pasuk with Bekichashba is coming to exclude if someone was asked to give money by one of two brothers or one of two partners, and he denied it, that in that case, he's not going to bring a carbon ashram. It's not going to be a Shavuos Apikadon. Then the pasuk continues, the nishbal sheker, he makes a shvua that's false. Prat l'loiva b'shtar l'loiva b'edem. That comes to exclude if the original halva was made with a shtar, was made with edom. So we're saying we receive in the pasuk that if someone made the halva with Edom, and there are Edom that Shimon owes the money to Ruvain, Shimon's not, if Shimon makes a shvua, he's not mechayiv Shavuos Apikadon. That seems to be right on point of what Rabba was saying. Amalei imishum ha loy tesayin. No, that would not be a raya. But oima lavisi v'loy lavisi be'edom, lavisi v'loy lavisi b'shtar. I'm not talking about where he's saying, when we say over there that he's not going to be chayiv, where there's Edom, it doesn't mean that there are Edom standing there ready to say the Edis, but rather where Ruvain makes a shvua, Shimon makes a shvua, I don't owe money to Ruvain, and he says, I didn't lend, he's saying, but he's not making a shvua that he didn't lend. He's making a shvua that he borrowed the money, but it wasn't with Edom, or he's making a shvua that he borrowed the money, but not with shtar, which is again, like what you're thinking, what's the point of this? Who cares whether he lent it? If you're admitting you owe the money, you have to pay it back anyway. So he's saying that's exactly the point. That's the reason why he's not going to be a kaifer b'pikadon. He's not a shavuos b'pikadon because he's just talking about an irrelevant aspect of the loan. He's being mighty, he owes the money, but he's saying, I'm sticking on principle. You said that it was be'edim, it's not be'edim. You said it was b'shtar, it's not b'shtar. But he still has to pay the money, and therefore it would not be a shavuos apikad. So this is not a raya to our question. We're not talking about whether he's lying neged Edom. We're talking about where he's lying about Edom, and that's the reason why he's potter from shavuos apikad. Mimai, and how do I know that this is what it's talking about? The first part of the Bryce said we're coming to exclude where he's excluding, where he's saying I only borrowed from one of the brothers and not from the other. What's that? If we're talking about where there are two brothers or two shutvin, and he owes, they both said, each one of the brothers or each one of the shutvin said that Reuven owes us $100. And he says, no, I owe you $100, but the other brother, I don't owe $100. Or the other shut if I don't owe $100. That's a straightforward, what do we care that there were two people and he was moided to one and kaifer in the other? One he was kaifer to is a full-fledged shavuos apikadon. He's making a shvur that he doesn't owe money to a person. What do we care that they're shutfin? El lav the amilei mitravin yizafta. They say to him, you borrowed from the two of us $100. He says, no, I borrowed $100 from only one of you. It means that they're just arguing about whether they're shutfin in this loan or not. But he's admitting he owes $100. The whole loan is just $100. That's all that's at issue here. And the only question he's arguing with them about is whether he owes it to the two of them or to one of them, whether they were shutfin or it's individual. The Havile Kfiris Dvarim Ba'alma, which is again another version of a corollary, an ancillary issue that he's arguing about that doesn't affect whether he owes the money or not. He's admitting he owes the money. He's just arguing about who exactly, whether it's a shutfin. So they can divide it up amongst themselves. It's not going to make a difference. They admit that they're shutfin. So they'll divide it. So therefore, this is a raya that the other part, where we were trying to bring a raya, the second part of the brisa that said that loiva b'shtar loiva be'edim is also talking about not where he was arguing about whether against the edim, but he's arguing about whether they were edim, and it's again kfiris dvarim ba'alma. He's just arguing about a side issue. Tashma said in our Mishnah, "Ein chayiv al shigaso, ma'yu chayiv." He's not chayiv if he does it b'shayv, which we explained in the Mishnah. Is talking about if he does it with an einus, if he doesn't realize that he's lying when he makes the shvua. So he's not going to chayiv. Ma'yu chayiv al zdoina al sham b'kesef shkalim. He's chayiv when he does it b'mezid b'kesef shkalim. My lav zoden edim. Is it not talking about where there are edim testifying against him? So this is a raya Keneged Rabbah, because we're saying he's even chayiv when there's Zaden Edim. Lo Zaden Atzmai. No, I don't know why the Gemara thought that because it says he's chayiv b'mezid, it means where he's saying Keneged Edim. The Gemara answers no, it doesn't have to be. But after talking about where there were Edim Keneged him, he's talking about where he was a Zaden, he was a mezid, he lied on purpose, but there were no Edim contradicting him, and that would, according to Rabbah, that's the way he would understand the Mishnah. Tashma, we want to bring a raya back from the past parak when we're talking about Shavuos Ha'edus. We said Hayushtei Kitei Edim. So again, let's remind us of what Shavuos Ha'edus is. Shavuos Ha'edus is when you go to Reuven wants Shimon and Levi to say Edus. So when he goes to Shimon and Levi, he says, "You know Edus that will help me get money. I want you to come and say Edus for me." And they swear, "We don't know any Edus," and they're lying. And there is Shavuos Ha'edus. They have to bring a carbon Eilviyar. So you said how you it. What if it wasn't just Shimon and Levi? It was Shimon and Levi and Yisachar and Zvulun. They both knew the Edus to help Reuven win his money. Kafra Rishayna. So he went first to Shimon and Levi, and they say we don't know anything. And then they went to the second group, Yisachar and Zvulun. They also said that we don't denied no Edus. Shtein Chayavas. Both groups are going to be Chayav. Because either one of the Edim could have been on their own, there could have been sufficient edus to be Moitzi Mammon. So Zaktima, Bishlam Shniyat Chayev, the Kafrala Karishaina. The second, once you went to the first group, you went to Shimon and Levi, and they said, we don't know anything. So now he goes to Yisachar Zavulun, they're his last chance. They're the only ones who can cause him to get money. So you see that's why the second pair should certainly be Chayev Shavuos Ha'edus. Elarishaina, when he goes to Shimon and Levi, the first pair of Edom, and Yisachar and Zvulun are still out there capable of saying Shavuos. And he goes to them and he says, I want you to come say Edus, and they lie. They shouldn't be chayiv, and particularly according to Rabbah. According to Rabbah that says whenever what you're saying is not going to have any effect, like for example, where there are Edom, that makes what you do irrelevant. So we don't treat your denial, like by Shavuos Apikadim, we don't treat your denial as meaningful. Because anyway, there's Edom that are going to overrule whatever you do. So why don't we say the same thing over here by the two pairs of Edom, saying what you're doing, the first pair of Edom, when they're denying it, it's not meaningful because there's another pair of Edom that you're going to move on to. So the fact that we're saying Yechai L'Chayra is not like Rabbah. We see that even if what you're denying is irrelevant, because in that case, because there's a second pair of Edom that will confirm what you're denying, what you're making it that he has to go to the other pair, but there's another pair. Even so, since you're denying it, you're chayiv. So the same thing over here. If you're denying, it's going the other way around, where the Edom would contradict what you say, but it would still make it irrelevant. So too over here, according to Rabbah, even though your kfira is irrelevant because they're Edom. It doesn't make a difference. Since your kfira is an Edis, you're being kaifer in your Edis, you should be chayiv, just like over there. The first pair of Edom is going to be chayiv in spite of the fact that the second pair of Edom that can step in. Alushayna my mechayiv. So that's a contradiction to Rabbah. Ravina says no. As we saw this Gemara earlier in the past parak, we're talking about where the second pair of Edom, at the time that Reuben went to the first pair of Edom and said, I need you to support me in my din Torah, and they were kaifer, the second pair of Edom at that particular moment were not capable of saying Edis because their wives were sisters, and therefore they were puzzled Edis. They couldn't say Edis together. But if the question is if they're puzzled Edis, and how is there a second pair of Edis? But he said so one of the wives was about to die. So when Reuben went to Shimon and Levi, it was clear that soon the second pair of Edom were going to be valid Edom, but at that particular moment they weren't. So that's the reason why we said over there in the earlier parak by Shavuos Edis that the first pair of Edis is not irrelevant because at that particular moment the second pair of Edom were kroivim and therefore not able to testify, even though they were shortly going to become capable of testifying. At that moment they weren't, and therefore their Edis is still considered relevant. Masha'enkin over here, if there are another pair of Edom that are going to contradict, he's saying I don't owe money, and there are Edom that are prepared to say that he does owe the money, his Edis is entirely irrelevant. It's not going to be Milo Marid in any case. That's what we just want to say. What's the chiddush if they're both kroivim? Obviously, the first pair is going to be b'chuyev to say this. We're talking about even though they were geises, so one might say they're about to die and they're both going to be. The first Edis will be irrelevant when they die because then the second Edis can kick in when the wives die and they're no longer kroivim. Kamashmalan that even so, it's still considered relevant at this moment. Okay, so anyway, so back to the question of whether Rabbah is right that when someone is kaifer on a pikadon, whether he's going to be chayiv to bring an asham, when there are edim that are contradicting him, do we say the edus overrides his kfira? It makes his kfira irrelevant, and therefore he wouldn't bring the carbon. Toshma. Bal habayis shatontain is gone of a pikadon. Bal habayis. Ruvain is holding on to Shimon's object, and he says, Shimon comes to get it, and he says it was stolen from me. V'nishba, and he makes a shvua that it was stolen. B'hoida, and then later on, he's moida that it never happened. He still has the pikadon in his safe. Ubo Edom, and then Edom come and say, you know what? We saw that he always had the pikadon in his safe. Reuben was lying the whole time. If Reuben was moida before the Edom came, then Shimon is going to pay then Reuben is going to pay the Karen and the Chaimish and the Asham. He's over on the Shavuos Hapikadon. He lied. At that time the Edom hadn't testified yet. Now l'chayra, this is obviously not like Rabbah. According to Rabbah, as long as there are Edom able to testify, he should not be paying the Asham. But to continue with the Brisa, if after the Edom came, he was married, even after the Edom testify, if he's then Maida afterwards, in that case, the Edom are going to mechayev him to pay kefil because he stole it. He stole from the owner. In the first case, he didn't pay the kefil because he was a Maida b'knas. He was Maida that he stole it. Maida b'knas is part of it. The second case, Edom came, then he pays kefil, but he still pays the asham because he was kaifer in it originally. So you see from both parts of this brisa that even though there are Edom, he can be chayiv asham for being kaifer b'kvos apikadon. So this also could be talking about the Ravina, where the Edom at the time that he was Maida were not valid Edom because they were krivim, their wives were krivim to each other, and they were geisesis, and then later on or it doesn't have to be geisis. Later on, their wives died, and they became valid Edom. They weren't valid Edom at the time that he testified, so therefore his kfira was a full. At the time he made a shvuah, so his shvuah was a full-fledged kfira, and then later on, Edom came into the picture. Amar Ravina Levashi Tashma. Chamur mimenu shvuas apikadon shchayven al zayna makas shegas asram bekesef shkolim. We said before, we brought this on Amud Aleph. Shvuas apikadon is more chamer than shvuas edus, because on shvuas apikadon you chayev on a zadin makas al shegas asram, and then if you do a b'shog, you bring an asram bekesef shkolim. And the fact that it says he gets malchus, we're talking about where there is Edom. The kamar al shigasa ashram because of shkalim, and even so, we're saying even though there's Edom, he's going to be mechayev a carbon ashram. He says you can't bring a raya from that. The amalur of kahana are not tinila v'hachi tinila. Like we had said when we wanted to bring a raya on the original question of what do you do when someone has a hasra. So we had to, this is the brisa that we had brought, and we had then said that one teretz was that it's going according to Rav Shimon, the brisa according to Rav Shimon, who B'klal holds that there's no, you're not chayev amazed. But the second raya, the second way of being daichel the brisa was to say we have to change the words of the brisa. So this is the version that we had said before. We said whether he's bezadin, whether it's b'shayig, it's b'kesef shkalim. So if that's the case, we're not talking about Edom anymore, so it's no raya on this new question of whether, of rabbis that says that maybe be'edim, you're not going to be chayav v'shuas apikad. Toshma. I wanted to say that you can't compare Nazir, Tameh, because he gets malchus to a shuas apikad that doesn't get malchus. Hechidami. Idaleka Edom amai leika. If we're talking about where there's no Edom, then the Nazir Tameh would not get malchus. Elapshita de Ika Edom. Must be talking about this Edom time, but Shuas Apikadon she'ena leika. We said a Shuas Apikadon does not malchus. Malchus with the lucky. It doesn't get malchus of a kavah maisi. We only say that the difference between Nazir Tameh and Shuas Apikadon is Nazir Tameh gets malchus and a Nazir Tameh doesn't. But he doesn't get malchus. It's not saying anything about the carbon of the Shuas Apikadon. Tiyufta the Rabba Tiyufta. So l'chayra, this is a clear raya, not like Rabba's suggestion that as long as there's Edom, he won't be chayiv on a shvuah to be kaddim because the Edom make his shvuah irrelevant. Because we see over here that this brisa makes clear that even in the case where there are Edom, he still will bring his carbon ashram. Okay, we're just going to have to keep going because it's getting too close to the end of the Masechta. Rabbi Yochanan disagrees with Rabbah. Rabbah had said when he's kaifer, and we've just proved that Rabbah is wrong, so it's not really so shver that Rabbi Yochanan is disagreeing. He says when he's kaifer and mammon, when someone makes a shvuas hapikadon, he denies owing money, even if there's Edom, he's still going to be chayiv. But b'shtar, potter. If there's a shtar saying that he owes the money, then he's going to be potter. A shtar is going to be worse than, you're looking at me, why should a shtar be worse than Edom? We said even though there's Edom, he's going to be chayiv. Why is the shtar different? Amar Papa, my time in the Rabbi Yochanan, Edi avidi de maisi, shtar hamonach. Edom, even if there's Edom at the time that he makes a shvuah, his shvuah still has an effect. It's still important. What happens if the Edom die? The Edom could, they could die, they could move away, they could be unwilling to testify for whatever reason. But a shtar is very, it's very secure. You have a shtar. What's going to happen to a shtar?
Just lost.
Amalei Avhuna Breda of Yeshua or Papa shtar and Nami of Demerkas. The Gemara says shtar could also get lost. It's not so secure. Every time when we have to get the documentation for our passports to get the real ID, we're always like, are we really going to find our birth certificate again? Who knows if it's really in the place where it's supposed to be? Right? We all have that feeling. Elamar Avhuna Breder of Yeshua, Hainu time Rabbi Yochanan. There's a different reason for Rabbi Yochanan why he says with a shtar it's not going to be Yeshua's hapikadon. We should have a shtar shibit karkois. When someone has a shtar, that represents a right to be gaiva from karka. If someone owes me money, all I can do is collect money from him. But if I have a shtar, then I can not just get the money from him, I can be goyve his karka. Shtar is a right to be goyve karka. The A may be in carbon, not fear shibet karkais. As we're going to see, is you don't bring a shtar, there's no fear, shuas hapikoden on a denial of karka. Karka is an exception. It's only in other things. It's you steal something. Why is karka different?
No. Why would the fact that started shooting because make a difference in Allah that makes no sense.
That's what I'm saying. So you're asking why would karka be different? Why would the fact that we're talking about a shiva karkais, if someone denies that, why would that not be a shuas apikadim? Why we said it could be a gneva, it could be a...
Why would we put it from a carbon because it's a shooting because
Yeah, that's your question. So
Yes.
the Gemara is going to discuss that. That is what it's going to either be because karka ain't an exelis, or because karka is excluded from a pasuk.
Right.
There'll be a couple of possible reasons. That'll be, I guess, for tomorrow. Feels like I got through so much, and we didn't even finish the block, today's block. Yeah, it's good stuff.